Thank you for tuning in to this panel discussion titled, What Does 6G Need to Deliver to Other Industries? Run by 6G World or 6GSymposium. My name is Elson Sutanto. I'm a principal analyst with Juniper Research. We are a telecoms technology industry analyst house that researches into how technology is changing a range of different verticals. And today I'm joined by a range of experts in this panel discussion. And we will be covering quite a bit of sub-themes and related topics to this discussion on what does 6G need to deliver to other industries. So if I can just hand over now to the panelists really to introduce themselves, that would be fantastic. I think if we can start, I'm just going by what I see on my Zoom screen. If we can start with you, Shamik, and then go to you, Mischa, and then you, Roger, Pamela, and then you, Pamela, that would be fantastic. So Shamik, would you like to kick us off and introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do? That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Elson. First of all, I hope everybody of you are safe in these days. And thank you very much for inviting me to this panel discussion. I am Shamik Mishra. I am the CTO for connectivity in Capgemini Engineering. And I also globally lead our 5G and edge computing offer globally for Capgemini. And I'm based in India. I'm primarily looking into our technology, architecture, and strategy from a telecommunications perspective, which to a certain extent means 5G these days. Apart from that, I also run a research and innovation program on future of networks and compute, and where we are actively researching how 6G would be utilized, I would rather say consumed in different industries, and how the network itself would have to be built, keeping 6G in mind. And we have a range of use cases that we are currently debating, particularly in the areas of entertainment and industrial research, particularly in manufacturing, as well as in transportation, including connected cars. So hope to discuss some of these topics with you, and particularly how different technologies developed in different contexts actually makes sense when they come together in 6G. So hope to hear from you more today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shamik. And Mischa, if I can hand over to you with your intro, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mischa here. So I'm based in London. I'm professor at King's College in London. And we were the first ones to build a 3GPP compliant 5G system together with our friends from Ericsson, which was quite a fantastic learning curve. And we are now on, of course, to help building 6G these early days, consolidate thinking, help, of course, also with skills, skills provisioning. I'm also sitting on our regulator, on the board of our regulator, Ofcom, where I'm frequently providing input to various regulatory aspects. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mischa. And Roger, if you could go next, that'd be great to hear from you.
Thanks. Thanks, Elson. So I am the 5G program manager for Keysight Technologies since 2014, and then the 6G program manager for about a year and a half. I also do I'm the director of our strategy for where we work in wireless standards. So been involved in the test and measurement industry for mobile and commercial communications for 36 years in various things that we've done, different kinds of jobs. So it's a pleasure to be with this group. I know many of you, and it's very interesting to be discussing already yet another generation. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Roger. And last but not least, Pamela, please do give us your take on what you do and who you work for.
So I'm Pamela Kumar. I'm the Director General of TSDSI. TSDSI, the Telecom Standards Development Society of India. It's, you can call it, it's the ETSI of India. At least we aspire to be the ETSI of India or this geography. So we are also a partner at 3GPP and 1M2M, along with ETSI and ATIS and all the other global STOs. We also participate actively at ITU related to all the telecom standards. So, like all the other global standards development organizations, but we are youngest kid on the block, so to say. We are the youngest global SDO in all these forums. And it's been a very interesting journey. We came into being in 2014, and that's when we registered. And so the first, in 2016, 2017 is when we started realizing that there was a need to bring some India-specific requirements to the discussions on 5G. And this took shape as what we call the low mobility large cell requirement in ITOR WP5D specifications for IMT 2020, and has ultimately culminated into a specification in parallel to the 3GPP 5G, which we call the 5GI, because it's, given our national priority on rural connectivity. We want 100% rural broadband for every villager, and 70% of our population lives in the villages. And the conditions in our villages are very different to what was the vision of rural for the other proponents of 5G, which were talking about, 500 kilometer per hour bullet trains and 125 kilometer per hour express highways in the villages. We don't have them. We are not likely to have them for a long time, but we have our people living in the villages with special requirements, with the villages dispersed at a 12-kilometer distance from each other, base stations at 12-kilometer distance, and still you want to give them all the benefits of 5G technology, which is 100 Mbps throughput. So how do you achieve that? And that's what has been, something that we have been driving. And it's not unique to India. It's a requirement that all rural and remote areas across the globe would need. It's just that a matter of prioritization. It was a higher priority for us than the expressways and the bullet trains. And so that's been a great experience. And we will talk now about how we are looking at 6G in this discussion. And it's actually a pleasure to be with this group. This is a very different group, Keysight and Capgemini and University College of London, King College of London. I mean, this is a very different group from what I'm used to. It's usually the Nokias and Ericssons and Qualcomms and Huawei's of the world and Samsungs. So I'm really looking forward to a very different and insightful discussion here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pamela. Very true. Yeah, very diverse panel members we've got here. So we'll have some good viewpoints as well. Just a reminder for our audience members, if there's a question you have, please do send it in through the chat function. You should be able to find that. If there's too many questions, we may not be able to get through all of them, but we'll be able to collate those questions offline, and our panel members should be able to get back to you offline on that, or feed it back to 6G World and they'll give it back to you. So please don't be shy, send in your questions, that would be great. So yeah, without further ado, let's kickstart this session. Roger, if I can move to you, previously before we set up this discussion, you had given some key thoughts on, where you think the primary driver of 6G will be, maybe particular applications or verticals. And really, if it's great to hone in on the why, that would be great as well, because we're already kind of getting to grips with 5G, let alone 6G. So please do give us your initial thoughts to kick us off. Thank you. Okay,
thank you, Elson. The first thing I have to admit is that I'm not much of a futurist. I really admire, I know a few of you folks, Mischa in particular has this amazing job of what he does, but also how he thinks about the future. And I, for one, was a pretty outspoken opponent of cameras on cell phones. I thought that was one of the dumbest ideas I'd ever seen. And also, when I had my first training class in GSM back in the late 1980s, I was surprised about this thing called SMS. I thought that was the dumbest idea I'd ever heard. So you may have the wrong guy on the panel here, but I'll do the best I can. First of all, 6G looks like it's ready. The vision, there's tens of white papers out there. ITU kind of kicked things off. There's a couple of big projects out of Horizon 2020 that are doing a great job of setting vision. President of the United States over almost 2 years ago said we had to have 6G as soon as possible. But it really is just a vision that is forming, and that's really up to people like us and other folks that, like Pamela mentioned, to flesh that out. And you could think of it as just follow on from 5G. I was in a panel discussion 2 months ago, and somebody said 5G is the last monolithic generation. Everything beyond that is going to be evolutionary, and one might suggest that that could be the case. I actually disagree with that. There are elements of what we have to do in 6G that are revolutionary. I think Pamela hinted on a couple of those, because we have to think about this a little bit differently. So I'll start with a couple of points, and then I'm going to steal some ideas because, as I said, I'm not much of a futurist. But I think, like a lot of previous generations, a primary driver of 6G is going to be entertainment and advertising. I'd love to be more holistic than that, but fundamentally that drives a lot of business decisions in our world today. The biggest companies in the world today, or at least those with the highest market cap, are advertising companies, or they're a blend of entertainment and advertising. And I've said that 6G needs to do for Pokemon Go what 4G did for YouTube. But that's not other industries. And the point of this conversation is, what does 6G need to do for other industries? And so things like industrial applications or healthcare, or even defense applications, civilian government, automotive and transportation, and that sort of thing. What do we need to expect? And what I'm going to do is just very shortly borrow from some ideas that have been published already from the HexaX project. Now, I'm not part of this project. It's part of Horizon 2020, the last major call, but I really like this work they've done in setting vision, much like I liked the Metis work that happened back in the 5G days. But they have families of use cases. Sustainable development, massive twinning, immersive telepresence, robots to cobots, and local trust zones. And if you want to have reference to these things, you could just look up the HexaX project and read their first deliverable. It's all in the public domain on the web. But number one on the list, sustainable development. And Pamela talked a lot about this already. This is one of those things where we have to find a way to make, if mobile communications are going to become a pervasive part of society, it has to be done in a pervasive way that actually makes a positive difference, not just for the almighty dollar, but for our lifestyle in general. And so that means having coverage, not just for rural areas, but for institutions, education institutions, and to be able to use the technologies we could bring to bear in that space. The idea of massive twinning, this digital twin concept, which has already started, but making that such that it is more pervasive, and you even have twins that cooperate with each other as you build, maybe interacting systems and be able to do what if scenarios and monitor what's going on. The immersive telepresence space, we're doing telepresence right now, but picture that as a holographic scenario, where you transmit more than sight and sound, but also we could shake hands, or as people, we could interact with things in other locations. And Mischa did a lot of early work on that. So just taking that to the next level, I think, is really where we need to go if we're going to put this to use, and think about what that would add to things like education, or from the standpoint of, as I said before, sustainable development, having telehealth available to a much broader range of people, and not just those who have fancy computers in their houses. Cooperative robots, think about the Boston Dynamics dogs running around, but they're actually cooperating with each other and doing some good from a security standpoint, from the standpoint of helping to do things that people aren't in the best position to do. But and then lastly, I'll emphasize the concept of security. I read the NetScout report just the other day about how the approach to ransomware has become such a important thing for sort of the other side of our industry, the dark side of the industry. And what we need to do in that space is profound. One of the challenges we have is that technology moves so much faster than policy, and the policymakers are still in the 20th century when it comes to cybersecurity. And so I think another thing that we need to do with 6G has nothing to do with the technology, but more about pushing the way that society behaves and policy behaves, so that we set policies that make sense for moving this communication technology in a way that is not just sustainable and massive and immersive, but is also secure and has the trust zone at a local area, a local network, and that can be expanded to the broader network. So those are the things that I think about. And I guess I'll close with my favorite quote from a talk that Mischa did several years ago when we were talking about 5G. He said, can you make money by connecting your cows? And he said, yes. And so think about also using communications in tech in businesses that have never really thought about it. Agriculture is moving into the 5G space, but for traditionally conservative industries where the stakes are high, mining, and that kind of thing, what can we do to make that more usable for them? So those are my initial inputs. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roger. Much appreciated. Thanks for those introductory points, giving us a good overview. Actually, Pamela, can I move on to you? I mean, Roger touched on some of the aspects of sustainable development, and you had talked very interestingly about coverage of rural areas in India, which has been a priority, for you guys. And obviously at the TSDSI, you guys are very aware and of the importance of standards driving the direction of technology, particularly 5G, 6G. Can you talk to us a bit more about I think the gap between 5G and 6G, where you see things going? Yeah, the importance of standards and anything else that would be fantastic to hear.
Okay. So we entered the 5G game pretty late. As I said, it's only in 2017, 2018 that we started entering, and we were told you're 4 years or 5 years too late. We've been working on this for 5 years, and you're coming with a new proposal now. What do you think? So it was quite a uphill battle to get in there. But lo and behold, while we are still working with the government to release spectrum and do early 5G trials, the community in TSDSI is very gung-ho about 6G, and there's a detailed technical report that they've been really working on in spite of the pandemic. I mean, that I see revisions of that coming out every other day, and the reason for that is what is motivating all these people is that the vision that 5G had put, right, the triangle, which was disruptive. It wasn't just the parameter diagram, that little circle with the parameter. That's what we normally were doing in the earlier Gs. Now we have this triangle, which is talking about EMBV and MMTC and URLLC. And why do we have this? That the overall vision is that life, the way we know it, the way we live, the way we work, the way we play, the way we go to war, the way we do business, everything is going to change with technology. So it's going to penetrate. So as they said in one of the 5G conferences, 5G is all about the verticals. It's about getting into the verticals. And if it doesn't really go and transform the vertical industries, then 5G will fail, right? So when we are getting into the verticals, it's not only about EMBB, and that's what the specifications have been able to rally. It's a very complex thing. And what we are beginning to feel is that it will take 6G to happen to really realize some of this vision. And it's better it happens faster so that the business case is there, right? Unless it goes into the verticals, the business case will not be there to sustain this whole disruption in technology. And that is what seems to be driving it. But on the other hand, there's all this research that is happening on newer technologies in these, holographic communication and haptics and smart surfaces and smart antennas and all kinds of new which are also being brought together to 6G as enabler technologies. So so a very important thing that we need to start thinking about, and I think Roger alluded to it, that we need to start thinking about this differently, that the way we do standards and the way we bring research and this specifications together for deployment of new technologies, it needs to change. It needs to be more adaptive, right? To embrace research into the specifications, and also for each vertical, like we created a new use case for rural deployment now healthcare may require something else, right? And healthcare in India versus healthcare in Switzerland may be very different, right? And it may require a different branch or a different vertical to be addressed. So this is a very important part that needs to be thought about. And from an India perspective, some of the key drivers for us are really, it's going to be about the smart villages, right? And what do smart villages mean to us? See, our cities are already so crowded. We cannot take that model of development that the rest of the world has taken, where from 75% we have only 20% people living in the villages and 80% living in the it's impossible to happen in India. Those 70% living in the villages have to be enabled through technology to have the best of healthcare and the best of education and e-commerce, and they have to be enabled to have all the facilities that are there in the cities. We cannot not prioritize that if we want to become a developed economy in our country, right? We are talking about moving the industry or the factories or manufacturing closer to the villages. Right now, you've seen this pandemic, when there is a need for oxygen. Okay, we have all these factories which were using oxygen in remote areas in the country, the steel manufacturing plants and some other factories. Now what they're saying is, let's move the hospitals next to those plants where the oxygen is being generated, rather than ferrying all that oxygen to those hospitals which are in the metros. Because right now, people falling sick in the small cities or villages are rushing to the hospitals in the cities, and then the oxygen has to be rushed to. It's impossible to deal with it. We have to distribute this, right? So then you look at our cities, look at transport, look at our traffic. Our traffic is unimaginable. So any technology that is being developed to manage traffic in Geneva. I remember I went to San Diego to Qualcomm, and they were showing me their autonomous driving use case. Okay, and I said, most of those guys were from Bangalore. I said, why don't you put Bangalore traffic into this model and tell me whether this will work? The technology that you developed will work. Okay, because it's a different problem that we have of our traffic. Now, using technology to manage the traffic problem in our cities, and using technology to make our villages smarter. Okay, and then all the rest which Roger talked about, the security and the sustainability and all those other industrial IoT, that also. But I think our priorities are going to be different, and that's what's going to drive how we embrace these new technologies and where we innovate, which aspect of all those enabling technologies that we innovate on, right? So that's my perspective.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Pamela, for getting into the specific details of those requirements, for example, in Indian cities and rural areas. Very, very interesting, because technology has to deliver, to those places effectively. Mischa, can I actually just move to you on that particular point? I mean, you're someone who's obviously very familiar with the technical aspects of technology, having, like you said earlier, done a trial with Ericsson and been in this, most and all of your life. Do you have some viewpoints to follow on from Pamela as well, but to also add your own spin about some of the technical aspects of 6G, like is the control and user plane sufficient and so forth? Please do let us know your thoughts.
Right, not sure I'll go into that depth, but from the infinite amount of topics we could talk about when it comes to 6G, I would like to talk about 3 specific ones. The first one is the operating philosophy. The second one is technology, and the third one is a little bit on applications, which comes out of the tech game. So on the operating philosophy, so if you think about it, every single generation had its own spin in terms of something novel which was introduced on the back end, right? So the consumers wouldn't necessarily see that, but us as a telco industry felt that disruption. So in 5G, without doubt, this was softwareization. And as a result, because we have softwareized the system end to end, we could offer also an end-to-end automation, right? So that is really what 5G was all about. Now in 6G, I think there will be another, quantum leap here, and I call that self-synthesization. So really networks in the future will self-synthesize. So if you contrast that to 5G, in 5G, we have been optimizing things. We first designed it with humans, right? So these are engineers like you and me. We do the early academic research, then we bring it to standards, we build it, roll it out and all that. And then we throw really heavy AI at the networks to optimize it and really make it run very smoothly. But as somebody, who has built 5 companies, the innovation cycle is truly worrying me. So these 10 years innovation cycles we have been observing is something I always felt we can do better. So for the last 2 years, I've been working on this concept, which I call self-synthesizing networks, where essentially AI would start designing its own networking capabilities, right? Its own IP stack, its own protocols. And I feel if I zoom forward and we do this really well, then maybe by the year 2030, we will have innovation cycles shortened from 10 years to possibly a few seconds. Okay, so that is kind of the dream I'm currently looking at from an operating philosophy. Now, from a technology point of view, apart from, the AI we need tune further our massive MIMO and millimeter wave or even shorter wavelengths type of capabilities, I really think, the 6G will just get the tail or just the beginning of an entirely new tech, which is quantum technology. You all will have heard of it, but the repercussion of using quantum within our telco industry is gigantic. So I really think it will impact not only the end-to-end security aspects, which Roger has been alluding to, and which I agree are absolutely instrumental of making 6G a success, but it will also help us with any protocol which requires optimization, such as artificial intelligence. It needs to be trained, the backward training algorithms. If you have quantum there, you can just go so much deeper in the state space and your AI becomes so much more powerful. And in addition, for the real techies in the room, as you know, we are approximating Shannon's limit with some exhaustive search going on, and using quantum tech, we could definitely accelerate that and possibly nudge a little bit closer even to the Shannon limit, right? So therefore, from a tech point of view, I really think we need to work very closely with the quantum community and make sure it's natively built into our 6G network from day one, rather than having a post-patching going on in the year 2030. Now, last but not least, from an application point of view, I would like to tell you the story we've gone through in 5G. In 2014, I was in the panel at the Mobile World Congress. Don Warren had invited me to that panel, and we discussed what's going to be the killer app of 5G. And back then, I said that 5G will be as much about industries as it will be about consumers, right? And the rest kind of proved out to be history. So everybody went on, and the industry now is indeed a very strong portfolio. Now, my prediction for 6G is that it will neither be consumers nor industry, which will really leverage on this amazing capability which 6G needs to bring. Now, if we just look at the data density of a petabyte per second per square meter, who is going to use that? Which industry, which human is going to use that? So the answer is, I think these will be machines. So I think really we need to get used to the idea that we won't have, a very discrete set of services, whether that is video or my internet of skills or something else, but it will be, a very smooth, and fairly volatile spectrum of microservices, which will be created by machines for machines, by AI for AI, right? And as a side result is, we won't have that oversight anymore on the services as we see today until 5G. And also we will probably need a new management plane. I call that the AI plane, which will need to coexist with the, data plane and with the control plane. So these are just really points I picked from the operating philosophy, the tech and the applications. But I maintain, the big success of telco is that everybody works together, and that consolidated thought leadership is absolutely vital. And for all the academics in the room, we just got a paper accepted in the IEEE proceedings on the challenges and opportunities in 6G. I may share a link maybe later on if that's permissible. But also, from an industry point of view, not only the ITU is very active, but also NGMN has just released their 6G thought piece. And I think we are going in the right direction from an academic point of view, but also from an industry point of view. That's it from my end. Thank you.
Very interesting, Mischa. Thanks very much. Just a quick question. You were mentioning about the quantum computing community and the innovation cycles shortening. I mean, that's a very, very significant, interesting point. Why do you think we haven't worked closer with them so far? Is it because people or groups are working too much in silos or isolation, or give us your take? It would just be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think quantum is still perceived to be, a very early prototyping, maybe from a tech readiness level 3, but I think it is moving very quickly now to something which could be used within production environments. And what I'm very concerned about is once that tech is ready, that we are not able to absorb it simply because our initial thinking in the year 2021 did not consider this tech to be production ready in the year 2025, 7 or 30, doesn't matter, right? So it's not ready yet, but it will be. So we as a community need to be ready, build in the APIs. However, we need to rethink that whole thinking, but start thinking natively quantum from day one.
Very interesting, very interesting. Thanks very much. Great. So Shamik, thanks for your patience. I'm going to come to you now. And then I think we'll go to a few questions. We've had a few questions come in. So Shamik, I just want to touch on, your experience, as an engineer. You're very used to dealing with use cases and innovation. You were talking to me earlier about some of the things you've been working on, from cognitive networks to mesh networks as well, and the convergence of different technologies to drive industrial innovation. Please do tell us your take with 6G, your experience, what Capgemini is doing. It'd be really great to hear that.
Sure, Elson. I think the interesting part is when you are the last speaker, you have hardly anything to say because most of the topics have already been covered, at least the use cases, right? But that's great. I mean, that shows that we are kind of, the industry is aligning towards the real vision of 6G, which is great. The reason why we engineers are actually interested in communications technologies is because we believe that things should get connected to improve productivity or generate new revenues. I mean, that's the reason why a company like us would actually be interested in communications. And if you look at 5G and we have been building products, we have been helping our customers build products. The operators roll out their networks for all the generations of mobile network. And what we have seen primarily in 5G, at least, is the heavy reliance of the ability to communicate between machines through 5G. I mean, if you look at the latency, if it is like 30 milliseconds or 20 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds, no human is actually going to ever take the benefit of that because the brain can't process at that granular latency. So it would all be about two machines communicating, whether it's a car to the network, whether it's a train to a network or whether there are thousands of sensors and devices to the network. And that's what we exactly would like to see evolve in 6G. Now, if we take specific examples of how perhaps 6G would look like in given the changing scenarios, we were expecting the peak data rates to be much higher in 6G naturally. I mean, why have a 6th generation wireless network if you don't have higher bit rates? That would perhaps mean that the entertainment industry would have go through a rapid modification. I mean, even today, if you look at the creation of content has been heavily democratized. Everybody with a mobile phone actually can create a content. In YouTube, you see more users creating content than ever before. And if the 16K video resolutions with 360-degree real-time refresh rates can actually give a true immersion experience, 6G might be able to deliver on that promise. But that's on the consumer side of things. On the industrial or on the enterprise side of things, the major area that we believe that 6G would make a difference is manufacturing. Primarily because there would be more of a need to automate systems going forward, and we already see that happening quite heavily in 5G itself. Now, that would also mean that we would have to look at manufacturing networks or industrial networks carefully and see what is needed to be done in order to move towards a more wireless network. First of all, many of these devices are actually interconnected like a mesh network today. And wireless technologies, particularly the 5G technologies, are expected to be like a tree network. So basically, the devices connect to a base station, it goes to a core network, and so on and so forth. So if you have to have kind of a mesh network, or at least a minimalist mesh network, we would have to look at how we can build 6G networks like a plug and play, like a Wi-Fi router, so that you can actually have a truly private network and actually move closer towards mesh networks. That's one. That would also mean that perhaps we need to eliminate the core network at all from the 6G architecture. It could well mean that the radio network itself would be able to do a lot of stuff. This would also mean that there would be a massive number of radio networks in the vicinity. There would be a huge number of devices, and as Mischa alluded to, we would need a completely different management plane to orchestrate applications, right from the cloud to the edge compute to the devices. Also, the fact that we expect the devices to be more intelligent going forward. It's not just going to be a connected device, but it will be a connected plus an intelligent device. So we expect applications to run on the device as well. This would also mean that the applications would be distributed. There will be a part of the same application running on the cloud, something on the edge, something on the device. And this would mean quite a complicated orchestration and management principles that needs to be built for this. So that itself is going to be quite challenging. The question about distribution is also quite important in the sense that today we expect computing to be centralized, at least till 4G it was, then we are moving towards edge compute. So we are distributing the compute to a certain extent, and this would get further distributed when you go inside the manufacturing shop floor. Now, how to actually manage this many data getting generated? How do you actually manage how do you manage the synchronization across so many devices, so many computing resources? That's not going to be easy either. And the technology will have to evolve around that domain. So in general, I think we will have to converge technologies. I mean, technologies which were not exactly meant for wireless technologies will have to be brought together. And we are already seeing that in 5G. If you look at 5G itself, AI was not really built keeping edge computing in mind or keeping 5G in mind, or cloud computing was built for a completely different purpose. Smarter devices or new kind of silicon being built for artificial intelligence or for communication purposes was completely built for a completely different reason. But with 5G and edge compute, all of these technologies are converging, and we are actually able to build use cases around it. At the end, I would say that it also depends a lot on the developer ecosystem. End of the day, innovation and how new use cases are built comes from the developers itself, right? I mean, if you look back in 2G or 3G, we actually didn't know how to consume internet on a mobile phone. We used mobile phones with a rudimentary browser, and we hardly could even navigate the internet. In 3G, with Apple and Android ecosystems coming in, we got into what is called apps. We suddenly realized by increasing the phone's screen size and with a touch screen, we are able to consume internet better. In 4G, we actually were able to consume internet even better because we had a reliable mobile network. So our mobile commerce became important. We could hail a taxi easily without having to worry about anything. So the whole consumption model has changed with internet, with the evolution of wireless internet. And I think in 6G, we would see a completely different consumption models, particularly from a device-to-device connection. And that's where I think the world is heading to. Let's hope that's the way it is.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shamik. Very nice summary there. Great. So I think, not to waste time, I'm just going to move on to a few questions here. And we can see, which one of you want to answer this. So maybe Mischa, you could answer this one, or anyone else if you think it's applicable to you. It says here, what does the academic community need to do to train the engineers to develop 6G? That's from Martin Rowe. What would you say?
That's a great question. Much more. I think academics, the problem we have is just explaining what's happening behind the scenes. For us to change curriculum, we need to apply. It usually takes, 18 months at least to change something, but our industry is moving so quickly. So we clearly need to beef up, a lot of the academic stuff still being taught 4G really in depth. We haven't really caught up, broadly speaking, with 5G. I'm not really sure what 6G education will look like. But in a nutshell, I think more practical things. Students need to learn how to configure a Juniper switch, as an example, okay? Or build a cloud network, subnetting, hybrid clouds and all that. We need, from an operational point of view, students need to learn how to use AI within the telco setting, right? How to write network functions, because we have now opened up this ecosystem, but we don't have any skill set to come up with new network function capabilities. So we need to build that. And of course, anything a bit long-term, blockchain and quantum would be good to have. That would be, in a quick nutshell, what I would say we need to do as an academic ecosystem.
Fantastic.
Hey, Elson, I'd like to add a couple of things, and that is a couple of things for academics and maybe reminders to students. Is number one, AI is not the only sexy technology to learn in college. There's still a tremendous amount of radio, high-speed electronics that needs to be done, advanced materials science, and then even outside of engineering, if you think about the neuroscience that is involved in understanding how to make a hologram understandable by a human being, particularly if it includes touch and maybe smell or taste, and then also the social engineering, social science, and even social psychology in terms of automated driving, for example, because the behavior of people from city to city on the road changes. And so how you interpret eye contact, people waving, people walking across the street is different. And all of these systems have to figure that out. And it's going to be a long time before we figure that out. So to just pile on with what Mischa says, we have other disciplines we have to focus on as well from an academic perspective, and then something about blending them.
I would like to add a couple of points here. So interestingly, a lot of contributions coming to us are from the academic community in India. And as a part of those deliberations, we've learned what the barriers are in the academic system to make them more prolific, involved in standards. And we've been driving something called, what we call it, the standards-driven research, that there needs to be a paradigm shift towards standards-driven research. And what we mean by this is very simple, right? That as the research scholars there is this period of defining the problem, right? Well, what problem are they going to be working on? And that's in that period, it's very important to encourage them to also go and attend some standards meetings and seeing what is, because that is the place where there's this confluence of industry and all those thinkers defining the vision for the next 10 years. The academia needs to get actively engaged and understand and to define what are those problems they should be, or at least some connection with the problems here, right? So defining your research problem, understanding where standards are going or what's being discussed in that circle besides what's happening in the conference is very key. And the other thing is that the other point, when you are actually working on your problem and you're coming up with those innovations or those new research that you have come up with, new ideas in your research, bringing them back and seeing what it will take to contribute and make a difference to impact the specification and the future direction that technology is going to take. So somewhere looping that and incentivizing academia. I think a big barrier right now is academia is all, the metrics are all publications, right? Moving away from that to patents and to SCPs. So if you all the grants that academia gets, if SCPs or contributions to standards is also a metric, I think that is something that will I mean, I know academia loves to do blue sky research, but I think the complexity of what we are trying to deal with requires the best brains to come together and grapple with all the different dimensions of technology that need to be that require innovation and require research. Sure. More realistic and more,
Sure. Thank you, Pamela. Really interesting to hear those viewpoints, and you, Roger, as well. Mischa, I saw you nodding in agreement there with some points. Do you want to add to it? Mischa, hello?
Sorry, I was just negotiating lunch. Could you repeat that? I really apologize.
Oh no! If you were just able to add to Pamela and Roger's,
No, absolutely, spot on, 100%. We need more co-engineering. Completely agree. We need more cross-disciplinarity and really do this properly. What Roger was alluding at, and completely agree also with Pamela. We need more standards thinking. I'd love 3GPP to open up for academia. We always need to contribute via industry. We do that through BT and Ericsson, as a matter of fact. So. But ETSI is quite open, so therefore, and the UK is starting to move now on this impact assessment. So we're not only judged on publications, but also on the impact we do, and therefore all that type of standard work is really part of that. But I agree, it should really be something which is done globally.
Great, thanks, Mischa. Shamik, did you have anything to add as well on the training of engineers with 6G knowledge and other related things?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we being a services company, the importance of talent is absolutely understood by us. The question, of course, arises is that are we generating enough engineers with the right set of talent from the academia globally? I think that's not entirely as per the requirement, I would say. So we have more demand for engineers today as compared to the supply today, particularly in the area of wireless communications. And as I said, technologies are converging. So an average engineer coming out of an university would actually need to know a little more than just what they would have learned in a course. Because they would have to learn a bit on artificial intelligence, they have to learn a bit on devices, on connectivity, but more importantly, they need to understand one specific area pretty well. And in my opinion, that part of communications technologies are not really going that fast with the academic world today. In terms of people coming out of that, we end up seeing a lot of engineers doing banking after graduating from the university, and this particular problem is there in India. So how do we actually incentivize engineers to spend time in research while they are at university and work in tandem with specification bodies and with different government research initiatives? I think that whole structure has to change in order to incentivize students to work more towards fundamental research.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, very true, Shamik, completely agree. I just have also a question here for you, Roger, from someone that says, so bear with me, it's quite a long question. It says, Roger, you said that 6G should do for Pokemon Go what 4G did for YouTube. Is this not the problem we have in addressing industry needs in comm systems? When serious work on 4G started by the ITU, for example, YouTube did not exist yet. So should we be addressing Pokemon Go or something which does not exist yet? In developing previous Gs, we did try to speak to industries, but they did not know what they would want in the relevant time frame. Which key industries already can tell us their requirements for 2040 so we can lay the right framework and target KPIs for 6G accordingly? So can I throw that to you? Quite an interesting kind of chicken and egg scenario. Let us know your thoughts.
Well, to some extent, that's my point. The Pokemon Go of 6G, whatever that is probably being thought up right now in some dorm room or some retirement community or some flat somewhere, or multiple places, and the one that will become manifest is the one that will make all the money. But again, that focuses on the entertainment and advertising industry, which we know will take full advantage of this technology. But the real point of the question is how do we engage the rest of the world in a conversation of what could be? And I think it's there's a couple of things that are encouraging to me that will facilitate that dialogue. Somebody in another Q&A mentioned the 5G ACIA, which is an organization looking at the industrial use case. And it's not a standards body as such, but it's a way of getting a common set of thinking between the OT and the IT side, and then forward-looking industrial thinkers. And I think it's organizations like that that will help force people that in industries, like me, Luddites that don't understand that SMS might be a good idea, to think about the possibilities. So that's one area. And the other one, and this gets back to my comment on policy, in my own country, public-private partnership is almost anathema. And this is an area that I think is really key for a lot of areas from a policy standpoint, is to facilitate that conversation between, what you hear Mischa talk about is pretty wild. I'm skeptical about quantum being ready for 6G, but if we think about it in terms of what can be and have that dialogue with other parts of the industry, then you'll get the forward-looking folks in industry, in healthcare, in education, in government, imagining what could be. And I think it's in forums, and it's probably only in forums like that where you can have it happen, because you've got people like what's on this group, and I'm sure a lot of the audience that are sort of imagining the KPIs and the use cases that you could do with 6G, given what we think the technology would be capable of, and combine that with individuals that are trying to figure out a better way to manage, port logistics or hybrid in-person and virtual education, which we all now know is an absolute disaster, right? These are the kinds of things we have to figure out how to make work better. And I think that partnering between the technology and then those who actually need to put it to use is the only way to make that work.
Very true, very true. Pamela, I see you nodding in agreement as well with Roger's thoughts. You want to share some of your views? Oh, you're on mute.
So what comes to my mind is that, isn't there a use case just staring at us right now in this pandemic times, that can we make this from home, work from home, study from home, healthcare at home, everything at home, a reality in a way which does not have the socio-economic negative, right? Can technology make the from home a reality in a way that the negatives, the social, psychological, and the economic negatives get removed, are a non-issue, because technology has played a major role in us being able to handle this in a reasonable way. But there have been some negative repercussions of it, right? in all our lives and in all our countries. So that's a big use case staring us in the face right now, and maybe growing on it. Just a thought.
Sure, sure. Shamik, just lastly with you, do you want to add anything as well to this?
I think I'll just maybe take 30 seconds. I guess people like Mischa needs to be wide, because at times, if there isn't somebody really thinking out of the box, a technology doesn't really mature. I mean, we at times are too short-term thinkers, particularly from the industries. We try to see what's happening next quarter and how do we make money in the fourth quarter, right? So that often restricts our thinking and our ability to invest and look at a thing in a long-term perspective. So people like Mischa are perhaps the best bet to go to the next generation of wireless networking. That some of the solutions are actually audacious, that actually drove, and who thought really that holograms would be possible, and 10 years ago, particularly on a 5G network, and it's normal today. We in fact very recently actually used holograms to showcase a live event for Sky. I think it was for X Factor, and this wasn't really something which was out of the academic books 10 years ago. So my only point is that at least somebody needs to be wild, and it better be the academia.
Yes, yes, definitely, definitely.
I'll jump into this for 1 second.
Sure.
Yeah, Shamik, thanks. Very, very kind, your words. But, interestingly, the predictions I make are actually based on, trend observations I do. So what I really try to do is zoom out, understand how the ecosystem moves. And I'm just basically putting linears, whether in logarithmic scale or linear scale, together and see when things happen. So my prediction about 5G being also an industry solution was simply because I've seen the KPIs were so interesting, or I knew the KPIs would be so interesting that not only the consumers would be interested, but also the industry. That's why I said it in 2014, right? And I was right with that. And with 6G, I see something very similar here, again, by using the two trends of, the 10X trend, which we've seen from generation to generation, but also the consolidation trend. We have two trends in telecoms, right? So putting it all together, this is what gives me usually a firepower to say what will most likely happen in a sense. And as an academic, of course, I have a bit more freedom of saying the wild things, and we'll see whether they come to fruition. We'll see. We should have that panel in 10 years' time again, so.
Yeah, we'll check with you in 10 years' time, Mischa. No worries. And we're just joined here by Mike Johns. Mike, welcome to the discussion as well. Do you want to introduce yourself and what you do, and then go into where you see 6G going, impacting the most? I'm sure you've got viewpoints on that, having worked with different industries and different people. So yeah, that'd be great. I'll hand over to you.
Sure. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yep. Yep.
Excellent. Excellent. I think we got our time zone mixed up, so I'm sorry just getting in now, but my name is Mike Johns. The company is Digital Mindstate. I'm the founder of this boutique agency in which we really specialize in cutting edge technology and how that's going to be integrated into lifestyle. So our slogan is very simple: humanizing tech into everyday life. My background started in the mobile space way back when with ringtone content, believe it or not. And being based in Hollywood, content, being a driver in this space, we did very successful runs working with T-Mobile. What started with T-Mobile spread across all the US carriers, and then also went over to Europe, as well as various spots in Asia as well. So I've been heavily integrated into the world of CTIA, and also with various organizations there in Europe. Very cemented in the world of mobility. I love where things are going with 5G, as well as the infinite possibilities of what's going to be happening with 6G. So I'm here. I'll be chiming in, giving some insight from my angle. I really specialize, again, on the humanizing of tech into everyday life. So we'll look at tech, replace tech with humanizing 6G into everyday life.
Sure, thanks, Mike. Just to ask you, I mean, do you see or experience any particular challenges at the moment with around 6G? Maybe it could be educating certain CTOs or whoever. Do tell us a little bit about the challenges. That would be great.
Right. So right now, from Hollywood's standpoint, it's very exciting, right? I think, and I've had this conversation with Alex. One of the big things that I've noticed being in the tech space for some 18 years is that everything is about growth and activations. And the area that I happen to be in is probably one of the biggest drivers. Entertainment, media is a big driver in this. One of the big projects that Hollywood is looking forward to, that 6G will play the biggest role, will be the metaverse. As far as challenges right now, it's very early. We're still, what, 10 years out? So you look at the Hollywood being the early adapters of this, being able to integrate the latest, that holograms, I heard that word being mentioned, what it will be doing in terms of lifestyle, in terms of media consumption, content play. Fascinating. We're just open. No one knows anything right now. It's uncharted territories.
Right. Interesting. Great. I just want to move quickly now to Pamela. Pamela, again, I just want to touch on the challenges aspect, but a bit about the, standards. I mean, we had a feedback from your colleague, Dr. Corey, and he was saying really that a major drawback of maybe the mobile communication standards is the standards process can sometimes be not so rigid, not so flexible, and not allow innovative ideas to be incorporated later, or it can take a long time to, adapt to that really. And, how does this apply to 6G and the standards, as Michael was saying, that could come in 2030? Do you have any thoughts on that? That would be great to hear.
So, as I said, that, when we started our journey in 5G and we brought in a new scenario into the specifications pretty late, the specifications were going to freeze in about 6 months or so. There was a date and we were bringing in a new scenario. So there was an initial knee-jerk reaction to it. But I think the community opened up to understand that this is important for a large segment of people in the world who need this kind of use case. So we were able to, within 6 months or so, make a case and get it in there in the specifications. So and the same thing we are experiencing in 3GPP, that some of the priorities were based on what were being seen as the big business kind of opportunities, right? Where the big business case was, whereas our use case was more about fixing the digital divide, so to say, and making broadband available to ARPUs in India are less than $2 per month, and will probably continue that way. So it's not about the business case; it's about development, right? Bringing development to the remotest corners of the world. So we are driven more by the development, technology for development rather than technology for profit. So so that paradigm shift was required, and we're on the journey of that. But I think people are beginning to and in this era now, it's 5G AA comes in there, right? 5G AA is coming to 3GPP meetings, and bringing them in was a big thing. Media and entertainment that he's talking about. Similarly, finance, all the fintech companies, the finance industry, the banks, and they are coming into 3GPP and ITU. And once they come there, and they get totally overwhelmed by the way these meetings happen, that in the whole day or the whole week, they get like 5 minutes to talk about their particular use case or their requirement, and they say, we don't have this kind of time. So I think somewhere that is being understood, that as all these diverse segments are coming in and need to come in and participate in the whole standards and specifications, and as Mischa pointed out, that innovation, what happened in 10 years needs to happen every second. Okay, maybe some bots out there, standardization bots in the future, right? So so I think the realization is there and the adaptability is there, but we need more and more people to voice this, and maybe some of the revolutionary is like Mischa equivalents need to have a louder voice in the standard bodies to drive that change and bring that dynamism into the process.
Sure. Very interesting points. Shamik, would you like to add as well, someone in industry and understanding standards and application to say how you operate? That would be great from your perspective.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we in Capgemini Engineering, we are active members of several standardization or rather industry bodies. I mean, we have been part of the GSMA's operator platform group, which I happen to co-chair as well, where we are driving common adoption of the telco edge cloud across different operators. At the same time, I think in many cases, the specifications actually drive a common model of implementation. But I think what's missing today, a common model for commercialization of technologies and how collaborative it can be when it comes to building use cases. And there are a couple of great bodies that we're working with, for example, the 5G Automotive Association, where we are trying to figure out how the connected car ecosystem can actually evolve, and with limited goals, but with a very strong focus on how 5G edge computing together can build the connected car ecosystem. Similarly, the 5G ACIA is a great association of companies globally who are trying to figure out what it really means to adopt 5G for industries. I mean, we all say that 5G is needed for industries, but how does it affect the devices? How does it affect greenfield deployment as compared to a brownfield deployment? I mean, there could be hundreds and thousands of devices which are not going to connect to 5G networks. So what do? Do we junk them? Or is there a way of actually building an architecture which can connect brownfield devices to a 5G network? And what could that be? So the role of such bodies are very, very important because they look at a certain technology from a practical usability aspect, which at times I think becoming a little more pedantic when in the standardization bodies often means nothing. And say, for example, there could be a standardization body which specifies how edge computing should work without speaking to an application developer who would actually deploy an application on that edge compute. Now that would be nobody would really work that way. I mean, if you look at the hyperscalers, did they really work in a standards-based model, or they looked at open source, or they looked at things that can be built from scratch, right? So in my opinion, that is the kind of involvement we need from industries, including open source, which is going to be very, very important going forward.
Well, thank you, Shamik. Do you often find, well, not often, but are there times where, obviously that risk to, operating within a certain time frame, having to have your outputs meet a certain standard, that you might have to make decisions, to go ahead with different technologies, or like you were saying, connecting some of those devices, and you don't know how to do it, if should you bypass 5G? Are there times where you are placed in a position where you have to make a decision given the maybe information you have at the particular time, and you just have to go with it because certain output has to be achieved by a certain date or time frame?
Yes, certainly. I mean, they're all based on business, right? If we have to roll out a certain use case, we will have to handle it based on available technologies and what we can actually do at that point of time within a certain cost and budget constraints, right? So yes, from a very practical implementation perspective, technology is a great thing, but we have to look at what's really available in order to make an use case work. And with time, we believe more and more such technologies will be available. We are also seeing a lot of, as I mentioned, open source adoption. And that's actually accelerating a lot of the standards development. I mean, I believe that actually implementing a reference implementation is a faster way to standardize stuff as compared to writing it down on a piece of paper. Well, it's my opinion. I'm not saying that standards are not important, but at times we can accelerate a certain technologies by a little more in a different approach.
Sure. Pamela, I'll just go to you then. I wanted to move the mic, but I see you nodding there at Shamik's comment.
Yeah, so this debate about open source versus open standards, right? so coming from the style, I know I've spent 50% of my career on the IT side and 50% on the telecom side. 50% on semiconductors, 50% on systems, and I've seen this whole thing converge. These are very, very interesting times. So so whereas the IT world has always been used to building, de facto standard, building the proto, and I mean, ITF was also like that. But now I think it seems to be that now that this technology is getting into all these lifeline kind of areas, right? IT was from a nice to have, it has become a must have, right? So regulation becomes important, and that's where the more structured way that the telecom world has evolved in, and the more laissez-faire way in which the IT world has evolved, some convergence needs to happen, and the open source and open standards are going to come together. You're not going to get rid of the standards. You're not going to get rid of the regulation. Open source will probably be the most embraced implementation, of an open standard, and they will all coexist. So I would just like to add that perspective that is emerging in the circles that I'm interacting with.
Sure. Thank you, Pamela. Mike, can I just move to you? So I just really wanted to ask where you're at in terms of understanding kind of 6G for the different clients and industries you work in. I mean, do the questions you get vary, like we take it on, or when is it ready, or what can it do different to 5G? You probably get a flood of different questions about how it can be applied.
Yeah, so absolutely. And you had talked about some challenges, so there are a couple of things that I'll add afterwards, but again, it's very simple. This is brand new, uncharted territory. From a Hollywood standpoint, what are our possibilities? So, I love the phrase for digital mindset, we have to be at the future, and when our customers are ready, be there to greet them. So in that same capacity, right now, the big play is what are the capabilities that I'll be able to do as it relates to blockchain. Blockchain is obviously a new, emerging space that is really kicked off into hyperdrive. What will be the implications that 6G will do in advancing that? A big problem that I'm seeing right now is, and Alex and I have had this conversation, when we look at the integration of 5G, its rollout, both here in the UK, this has happened during the coronavirus. And I think this is probably one of the best examples of bad press, because then we had conspiracy theorists out of left field blaming COVID on 5G. And I'd love to hear people's feedback, because at the end of the day, for stakeholders, that affected the bottom line. And that everything that we're doing is, at the end of the day, whether we're on the high level of technical, I'm into the business. At the end of the day, I know how to make a dollar. And 6G is a power mechanism. It's one, going to be disruptive, the balance between humanity and technology. This is where 6G hits the road. But before we even get there, when we talk about open source and standards, this issue of how 5G has been embraced has to be addressed when we look at where 6G will be. Lord only know what strand of COVID will be. Maybe we're on COVID 2025 or 25. If this is COVID-19, we're on COVID 25. And we don't know what will be there. So I think there's a lesson that has to be learned from the rollout of 5G and what has taken place to prevent that for 6G. Because at the end of the day, what happens is that becomes a deterrent to the possibilities that could take place.
Sure. So is it a case where you kind of have to keep up to date, talk with some stakeholders as to what's happening and form your own opinion, and you say to your stakeholders, this is what I gather, this is what I think, and here it is. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to take that apart, because I'm in the great state of California, and this is a very health conscious state. So on top of that, so when we look at 5G in the environment, right, then the question is, what is 6G doing to the environment? We've heard the president of T-Mobile talking about 6G may be impossible in urban areas, right? So I came in on this, and we got to look at, will 6G be ready by 2030, or will it be a little bit afterwards? And then the roadmap of getting there to make this still possible, will there be a 5G 5.5 to get us to the 6.0? You know, those are things that are still to be discussed. All I can say right now, when these conversations are with EA Sports, when these conversations are with Roadblocks, when these conversations are with the likes of Fortnite, oh, they're prepped. They're looking at the infinite possibilities of what they can do from the chip onward. But again, I got to reiterate, this is still brand new, wild, wild west territory. Mike, we want to collect all the information that we can to know what our possibilities are. We're still at that stage.
Sure, sure. I'm going to jump to Mischa and then you, Roger, as well, if that's good. Mischa, I saw you nodding. Give us your take as well on that, because, you know, you really resonated with some of the points there.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating what Mike was saying, and I completely agree with the two dimensions he was alluding at. The first one being the importance of the demand side evangelization, right? So I have a lot of faith in the supply side. This is our community. We will come up with something which will be 5.5 or 6G. How we do this, whether this is, you know, open standards, open source, we'll figure it out. The big issue is, once you put on the table in 2030, what's the demand side going to say, right? So therefore that work which Mike is doing and anybody else is doing, actually reaching out to potential clients, giving them a lot of headaches, asking them difficult questions. What would you do if 6G comes along? How does it impact your bottom line on your business model, or improve your top line opportunities? We need more of that, and we need it earlier, because that helps as engineers on the supply side. Now, on the you know, on the conspiracy theories, you know, interestingly, you know, we had it in every generation. Okay, we had it in 3G, we had it in 4G, but only in 5G was social media so strong, and clickbaiting is now so popular that it just exploded exponentially. But it taught us a lesson, and we have been discussing this also in Ofcom, which is FCC's equivalent, is that we as engineers aren't particularly skilled to reach out in a very simple form to our citizens, you know, in the streets. You can't go with ERCnet measurement stuff we have done on specific frequencies. It can't be more than 20 dBm. People do not understand that. Okay, so therefore, as a community, we need to learn to reach out to consumers, because they have the right to be informed. They have the right to be informed. We need to do this earlier. With 6G, we should start now. We should start now looking at how can we convey 120 gigahertz transmission link and tell to people, this is not gamma radiation, you will not die, right? So to start with that process very early. So completely agree with Mike on both dimensions.
Sure, thank you, Mischa. Interesting points. Roger, would you like to add to that as well, to what Mike and Mischa said?
Yeah, a couple of things. Let me go 2 clicks back and talk about the standards thing just briefly. I had a paper put under my nose a few weeks ago that was put together by some pretty smart people about the air interface of the next generation of wireless, and maybe even up to the MAC layer, being something that is not standardized, but rather calculated on the fly by artificial intelligence. And that goes back to what Mischa was saying before. And I think that that might put a new, I mean, that's a very dramatic change in thoughts. And I'll put a link to this paper out there. It's pretty great stuff, but that may change the way we think about how we address standards that can be more framing than prescriptive, shall we say, because I still think we need them. Any of you who have tried to figure out the difference between Thunderbolt 3 and USB-C know that standards are pretty critical. So we do have to figure this stuff out. But let me then extrapolate what was just stated by both Mike and Mischa. I can't say enough that I think the industry, our industry, does itself a disservice by not doing a better job of engaging with the community at large to tease apart mythology and fact. And instead of sort of making fun of some of the conspiracy theory out there, embrace that a little bit from the standpoint of, well, how can we help people understand physics in a way that makes sense to them, and how can we address the problems that are real, just in terms of the energy consumption of our industry and that sort of thing. What are the things that we're struggling with ourselves to make sure that it's a more of a sustainable business. I think that's really key. And Mike hit a really good point. We could run up against, if not a roadblock, certainly something that slows us down quite a bit, because policy is made sometimes at the whimsy of the populace, and who's maybe not always as aware of myth and fact as they ought to be. And it's really incumbent on us in an industry to make sure that that's really viable, not just what the possibilities are, but what the constraints are and the kinds of things that would make sense.
Sure.
I would
Thank
like
you,
to
Roger.
add something here.
Yeah. Sure, please do, Pamela.
Yeah, so this whole talk about demand side evangelization, right, and how important it is for, and as Mischa is saying, communicate in a way that 14-year-old can understand. Right? It kind of brings back the thought of that show, that cartoon show called Jetsons.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to be one of my favorite shows, the lifestyle of the Jetsons and everything about, I mean, we still haven't reached the life that Jetsons was living way back when I was a teenager, probably, or maybe a little bit more older than a teenager, right? So, and we are expecting 5G to enable that. So maybe we need something like the Jetsons show to kind of talk about what 5G can do to our lives and what 6G can enable, and where these are taking us. And maybe at that level we need a parallel stream of some kind of an icon who gets associated with these G's, so to say. Jetson G.
Sure.
Pam, you could be the model.
She could.
Yeah, maybe we can do it together, Mike.
This is true. I'm with that.
Yep. Great. Shamik, do you have any thoughts as well to add, really, to this?
No, I think it has been discussed now quite threadbare now. So this nothing new to add. But what I think is that overall communication of technology in a more to a larger audience, a general audience who may not actually understand what telecommunications is all about, is critical. That's what Roger had alluded to. We see a lot of popular science communication happening globally about science in general, but how many times do you actually see people trying to explain what's a telecommunication technology is all about, and what are their implications, whether there is any implication on the medical side of things. So that lack of communication is definitely a problem, in my opinion. And the fact that this would also may at the same time excite more people to join this industry, and at the same time perhaps solve some of the problems that or the skepticism people have about communications. So I think people in Juniper Research and others, and the companies like you, should actually drive a little more of community engagements around these things, because it's absolutely essential. And I'm sure everybody here would be more than happy to contribute there.
Very true, very true. A collaborative approach is always effective. Mike, you have a point.
Just to add to what my colleague has said, and this is touching really off of where Roger initiated this. Having been in the space, I think all of us being in the space for some time, what will make 6G great is its collaboration with the common ears. And often too many times, whether, my background in the world of VR, even right now, one of the big things that I'm making some good money with is NFTs. And to explain that to people, especially Hollywood, even after you explain it, they still don't know what the hell you're talking about. And so I've dumbed it down to the fact, hey, don't worry about the mechanics behind it. Here's all you need to focus on. And from that, by giving them that starting point, that opens up possibilities. And I think with 6G, and this takes a little bit of a different pivot, the fact my colleague said that unlike 4G and 3G, the issue that 5G had was the fact that social media really went out and just created an image, kind of tainted the image. We can learn from that, but we can learn from that because social media will still be advancing as well. But by bringing in the commoneers and getting their insight, and this is what I do even with a lot of focus groups that I create. If we're talking about electric cars, and I don't know if that has been brought up in this conversation, but I'm working with 3 manufacturers right now. 6G will play a role in that. They're just coming into the US, setting up shop, and they're going to also be dealing with regulations, US regulations that will be put in place to allow these things to happen. Well, one of the auto manufacturers, just to get involved solo to be exact, because they have a 3-wheel car project, this company's out of Canada, they're doing a lot of focus groups. And that's what I'd like to see more with 6G, where we're bringing in more focus groups, because this is one thing that the pandemic and the future of where everything is going, it's not about competition, it's about collaboration. So 6G World, even as a group, would be collaborating with other entities globally to further this initiative. And so I just throw that out there because I've seen this time and time again, where there are those who operate within the bubble, and then there's a disconnect with the commoneers that are to use these products.
Very interesting, very true. Well, guys, we've got probably 3 minutes left. So I'd just like each of you to just very quickly, please, just sum up what you want the key takeaway from this discussion to be. Can I start with you, Shamik, and then you, Mischa, Roger, Pamela, and then Mike, and then we'll end it there. So thank you. And again, a reminder to our audience, we're going to collate these questions that we didn't answer today and get back to you. So Shamik, very quick summary would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Elson, and thanks to all the panelists today. I learned a lot, definitely. It's the big takeaway for me is that 6G is important for us when we look at industries in general and how communications technologies would be central to several other things. And as I mentioned in the beginning, convergence of technologies are critical for making any technology work. And more so, we are seeing that how convergence of different types of technologies would build a use case. And today, what I did realize that what Mischa spoke, what Roger spoke, what Pamela spoke, I think what we really understood today is that there is a need for a wider industry academic standards collaboration. And without that, perhaps we wouldn't be able to make much headway in terms of figuring out what are the real use cases and where we should be investing. End of the day, if there aren't any investment, there's not going to be an accelerated technology adoption. So the collaboration is key, and I hope such symposiums would actually make that possible.
Okay, thanks very much, Shamik. I'm sorry, guys, we've just run out of time, but I think Shamik's done a great summary of what we've discussed. So appreciate all of your time, and we'll let you get back to your normality of routines and let you get to bed, Roger, as well. So thank you very much all for joining, and I hope we can do this again at some point again next year. So thanks very much, and to all the audience members for joining, 201 of them. So we had a good turnout. So thanks very much and take care.
Thank you.